yeah,
And it's a beautiful, Steve, it's a
Thank you.
beautiful book. And
Thank
that's where really the beauty of what Plato did, you're reflecting that. I want you to know that. And what Steve Critchlow taught, that's why it's so impressive what you did.
well, hi guys, great to have you all back again. We're here with Scott Olsen, but we're going to be listening to Steve Bass. About 3 years ago, Steve published his book, and we did do a little promotion about that about 3 years ago. But let's have a complete refresh, Steve. It'd be good to hear about the background, how you got to writing the book, some of the influences, some of your philosophical pursuits, and getting that out into the world.
Well, the question is, how long do you have? I mean, I'll try to keep it as brief as I can. I basically started when it started a long time ago. When I was a kid and I started learning, and I learned about geometry and try to integrate that with more of a fine arts approach, if I could, or to the extent that I could. But eventually, when I entered architectural practice, I found that I didn't have a way of self-analysis or any kind of reasonable basis of self-analysis. So I could produce things sometimes that I thought were good and sometimes not. I didn't really have a way of knowing exactly why something was more seemingly pleasing than something else, or why something seemed to work better than something else. And in searching around for it, I looked around in various modern writers, modern authors, and but they didn't have real answers. They had kind of vague answers and contradictory answers. So eventually, I found Vitruvius, who was an architect from the 1st century BC, 1st century AD, in the time of Caesar Augustus, and he has a method in his book of how to design classical architecture. And it was a method that is immediately intelligible and verifiable. It's not exactly scientific, but it's verifiable. And it uses number and geometry, principles of number and geometry. And so I was able to construct a classical facade just from reading Vitruvius, from reading what he said in Vitruvius. But I also had to go further and find a contemporary architect who could instruct me more on this. And I found a man named Alvin Holm, who's an architect from Philadelphia, and was teaching a course in how to draw the 5 orders of architecture. He was the only person in America, I think, who was doing that at the time. And I was able to study with him for a couple of seasons. And he instructed me how to design the classical. But he also imbued me with the idea that there was something more going on. And he tells the story of what they call the myth of the Corinthian maiden, right? And you realize there's something more going on here behind the scenes of this. It's not just a bunch of numbers, because the critique of classical architecture was that it's arbitrary and it's capricious. It doesn't have a basis. And if you read Vitruvius, it looks like it's arbitrary. The numbers seem to be arbitrary, but he's telling you every other sentence almost. He's telling you about Plato. He's saying something about Plato. I got this from Plato. I got this from this guy and the other, but it's almost always Plato. So I realized I had to study Plato if I wanted to understand where Vitruvius is coming from. I had to study Plato, and I found this man Keith Critchlow, who understood. They say in the spiritual world, they say if you ask, you'll receive, or if you. And I asked, and I got the answer. I got answered more than I knew, and he explained the nature of the Platonic system and the nature of number in Plato, and how it works. And this was incredible, and I was able to merge what I understood from him to what I had been learning from Alvin Holm. And so we created this synthesis, and I made it into a course that I taught at a place called the Institute for Classical Architecture for many years. And eventually, I took about 15 years or so, almost 20 years, but this book came out of it. It's a distillate, and I had to take a lot of stuff out. Unfortunately, I couldn't. And the book was too big. It went up to 300 pages or something. It was too big, but and I had to take a lot out that I had hoped to put in. But it's a study of how number creates form, how it happens. You know, we talked a little bit earlier about cymatics. It's mentioned a couple of times. But cymatics is an important study because you go from number, which is a concept, into vibration, which is relationship of number. And from vibration, you get into physical form. So there's a transition there. And number is the way to do it. And proportion consists of numbers. It's all numbers. And the numbers aren't just arbitrary numbers, it turns out. It's also been mentioned earlier that these numbers comprise the names of the gods through gematria, right? Through Greek and Hebrew names. The gods all have numbers. This is from I got this from a man named David Feidler, who was a very brilliant commentator in a couple of his books, and a couple of his publications. And he has a very good grasp on the theory, on this Platonic theory of number and how number incarnates and how it develops. So I was able to develop this in a way of producing classical architecture using these number principles. And I think it's a very powerful tool. And I've been able to present it to people and hopefully turn them towards this older way of thinking. And so basically that's been my work. Now I'm sort of approaching the end of my time here in the world in general. I had a serious health problem earlier in the year, and my time may not be that long. I don't know. It's not certain, but so I'm closing up my affairs basically, and I'm not really doing any more research. But this book I think will hopefully outlive me, and architects will be able to use it, I think, and create work that is more humane. It's just more humane. Unfortunately, the principles of modern architecture are the inverse of the classical principles. So where the classical principle was humanistic, this is almost dehumanizing. And where classical architecture, excuse me, was centered and balanced, modern work is intentionally uncentered and unbalanced, and it takes you away from a sense of unity. And so it's my work, I hope, will plant the seeds of an antidote to that in architecture and in the arts. I know, I'm not, unfortunately, I never got quite to study painting. I approached it a couple of times, and I studied life drawing, which is very important. And you learn about the golden section there as well. But that's how you begin to humanize things, is by studying the human being and studying this theory of the proceeding, maintaining, and returning, the good, the true, and the beautiful, as Plato put it. And beauty, again, one of the things that I found in my study is that, or determined, is that the concept of beauty is the memory of the unity of being that you experience, the joy that you experience when you remember that you're part of a larger cosmos and that you are not the end or the beginning. You're just a tiny fragment of something that's unintelligible. I mean, it just goes beyond human really understanding, and probably always will. And again, this is maybe my anti-science thing, but I don't think it's going to be a pathway to anywhere. I think we're going to keep coming back, because every time people study these things, they come back to the golden section. Every era in history has come back to the golden section in some way, because this is a basic principle of nature. This is what we've been talking about. It is definitely the basis of things. And if you understand these things and how they work, you get a power to control work and to control people's attention through your work, which is really what it's about. And then you can act for the good. You can say, okay, I'm working for the good now, and I'm making things that are harmonious, that are centered, balanced, that refer to the human being. Because all the elements of classical architecture ultimately in some way refer back to the human being through number, and mostly through the golden section. Right. So that's really been I would say that's my work, that's my contribution. Unfortunately, I don't know that I'm going to be able to do another book because
We'd
I
love
don't
to,
think
we'd
I'll be
love to
that
have
long.
part 2 of the book, Steve.
I'd love to have part 2 myself. Well, what happened is this: I had a serious health problem, and I was hospitalized for several weeks. And I basically, I don't know, I don't want to put too dramatic a spin on it, but I died. I was flatlined for 20 minutes. This is what I was told later on. And physically, I'm sort of okay. I think I had a little bit of brain cells that were lost, maybe, but when I woke up again, I felt like I had a new life. I had a second life, and so I gave away all my references. I'm not practicing architecture anymore, and I gave away I had hundreds and hundreds of books that I had used as references that I built up over the years. A whole history of the human race and the history of philosophy and Plato, all the works of Plato and the Neo-Platonists, and it's gone, it's out. I don't have it anymore. So I'm not going to be writing anymore, but basically it was a wonderful trip, and it was just a wonderful experience to go through this. And I felt like my life was worth something basically in the end, and it was through these studies, and I attribute this again, to myself, to my, my initiative in these things, but to the teachers that I had, all these teachers, and including Scott in a certain way. It was also a teacher and was very encouraging to me over a period of years. And I want to thank you, Scott, for that.
Oh,
Yeah, no,
you're
definitely.
welcome.
It was the encouragement. The book took a lot of encouragement. I needed a lot of force to get it out in the world. And you were, just being who you are and saying what you were saying and stuff, not doing anything really for me, but just, telling me that I had something of value and I had to get it out. That was very helpful, Scott, because I know that you're a substantial person. And
Scott, you've been
anyway,
through Steve's book. What are some of the key takeaways for reading through Steve's book?
oh my God. Well, okay. Well, the book has 4 parts. It's based on the quadrivium. It's on a 4-part study. So the beginning is a theory, and it goes through the Plato and the Timaeus and the Republic and ideas from there and how things work. And then there's the second part, which is a kind of a workbook part, where I go through the geometric constructions in what I would call a step-by-step manner. One of the issues about sacred geometry study is that you get presented with the finished image or the finished work, and it's got a lot of lines on it, and it's very hard to follow many times. It's very, very hard to follow. And so I took a step-by-step approach. I always start with a circle with a point, in the middle, and then I build on it from there. And I developed a method of design that's a 4-stage method based on the quadrivium: unity, division, structure, and manifestation. So in unity, you start with a circle and usually a square in architecture, in the physical world, because the square is the representative of unity in the physical world. And then you go into division. You have to, because unity has to divide. Unity itself can't be perceived. It's too much for the human being. So it has to have a division. This is the basic division that Scott has been talking about, and in terms of the divided line. So there has to be a division. So then you make a cut. You have to make a cut somewhere in the square, right? And that gives you certain parts that you're going to hang your design on, certain lines. And then you have to go through what they call a structure, which is you got to size and place the elements of structure in the building. Right, there's in the portico, the classical portico, there are columns, and then there's the horizontal member called the entablature, and there's a pediment on top, and you have those 3 things. So you have to size those elements and place them in the composition, and it could be a painting as well, but you could do it as a building. And then in the 4th stage, you have the full manifestation, which is the detailing of the building. Which order are you using, right? And what are the lengths of the elements in terms of the order and what are the details of that order, right? The Corinthian order has certain elements on it. The Ionic order has certain elements on it. They're actually all transformations. The Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian orders are actually transformations of one another. They're like morphological transformations, but that's a little deeper story. But basically that's so that's the second part, and I go through a number of there's a 4-column portico, a 6-column, an 8-column, right? And there's different ways of achieving them because there are 3 methods of application, right? There's an arithmetic method, which is in Vitruvius. You put it on a grid and you find points on the grid. But if you do that with Vitruvius, you'll find that all those points fall on golden section points. He never mentions it because he was an initiate, obviously, and he couldn't mention it. So he had to talk around it, and he had to give you the Vitruvian man, but not mention the fact that it's based on the golden section, right? He can't say that. So he just gives it and he leaves it. And then he goes on. But so that's the second part of the book. And I go through a number of things on that and a number of modern commentators who've done things on it. But and then the third part of the book, what would be the structural part or whatever, is a kind of a history I was going to start with the Paleolithic. I have a lot of notes on that, but I couldn't put it in. It was too big. So I started with Egypt, right? And then we went up from Egypt through Rome and through the Middle Ages, the Gothic era, and so on, and all that mystery stuff that's all around that. And then into the and into the Renaissance, where it's rediscovered again, then into the Enlightenment when it's kind of lost again, it's pushed to the side. And then I stopped with Jefferson, because to take it into the 19th and 20th centuries, which would have doubled the size of the book, and I couldn't do it, it was way too big already. So that's the bulk of the book is in the history part, but I think it's an interesting history. It's a history of ideas. And it involves things like the origins of Freemasonry and the images of Freemasonry and that kind of thing. And it goes into Jefferson. I love Jefferson, because he understood these principles, you see, and he built them. And he not only was the architect of the buildings, but he was the architect of the country. So we're living in a kind of Neo-Platonic structure that he created, this 18th century creation. And we're unfortunately, we've kind of exceeded it a bit at this point, and it's getting messy now. But so anyway, that's where the history part stops. And then it was a very, again, it was supposed to be a longer section, but it's a very short section, the fourth part of the present moment, the full manifestation of the present moment. And, what we're doing now, what we could be doing in the future, and how to deal with these things. So that's the précis of the book, basically. Got 4 steps, and I try to follow a quadratic or quadrivium kind of nature to it, and build on that. So that's the book. And unfortunately, again, I haven't really done more research since then. I have developed some other images since then, but since earlier in the year, I haven't really been able to work in a concentrated way anymore. And I don't know that I'm going to be able to. I may be able to in the future again, but as I say, I've given away my references now, and I'm entering a new life, I hope, and maybe just do yoga study or whatever, what I used to do. It should be more, because, approaching the end, you got to return. You're approaching the return, and you want to elevate yourself as much as possible for the return journey. And I'm always grateful for these chances to speak, Roger, and to anyone who's willing to listen. And it's great to be on with Scott.
Love listening to you, Steve.
Oh, thank you.
I met you about, I think, 20 years ago at the New York Open Center.
Okay, yeah.
Where you often did a series of lectures there. They were wonderful lectures, yeah.
Ralph White was a very good producer for me, and he was very helpful. He still is. I'm still friends with Ralph, and
we all have been. I was just going to say, we all have been on several of the esoteric quests, all 3 of us together. It's been a real delight. And I would like to say one thing about your book, because I find it fascinating, because I do philosophy and comparative religion, humanities. it would be an excellent interdisciplinary book in the humanities. Uh, there's just some directions it could go, and I'm really hoping in the future people will take a shine to it and use it as a text, because it really is something. You've done a wonderful job, Steve.
Well, we thank you. I've had some help in sending the book out to various libraries around the world. So I'm planting seeds, I hope, which will grow in the future, long after I'm gone.
Great.
Well, I'll have links to the book and, where you can get it. I presume it's Amazon.
Oh, it's available on anything. Yeah,
Yeah.
Amazon, any bookstore.
Yeah.
Great.
That's great. Great hearing from you again, Steve. And
Great to be here. Great to be here, Roger.
And hopefully you can attend us with Scott and Melody's workshops happening up in March. So we'll have you on. We'll have you on board with that.
Okay, I'll certainly try for that. Yeah.
Okay, guys.
So nice. So nice to be here with you, Steve.
Yeah, great to be here with you, Scott. Thank you. I was going to say anything further down the line, Roger. Let me know.
Yeah.
Happy to talking about something in the summer, but I'll be happy to.
Yes, there's August but there's March coming up as well. So I think we'll see you. I think we'll see you there. Good catching up, guys.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks again, Steve Bass. You're a wonderful man.
Wow.
Steve, I'll be in touch at some point regarding the event on the esoteric quest to
okay. Yeah.
Ralph had suggested, and I agreed that it would be great to have some of your thoughts on the project.
That would be great. I'm not going to be able to travel, but I can work by Zoom like this or send you.
Okay, great.
Great. Thank you.
Well,
guys.
your spirit will be there in Portugal with us.
Yeah, you sure will. Quest is great.
Take care of your health, Steve. There's no need to check out prematurely. We want you around as long as you can stay.
I'm going to try to stay for as long as I can. Yeah. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you.
See you soon, guys.
Okay,
Bye
thank
for
you.
now. Ciao.
Bye.
Everybody.